Welcome to the MSJC Internet Authoring Videocast.
In this video, you'll be learning how to complete Review Assignment 5. So in this review assignment, Marjorie meets with us to discuss the redesign of the blog page showing the parenting tips. As with the other pages that we've worked on, she wants this page to be compatible with mobile devices, tablets, desktop devices, and printers. Marjorie has already written the page content and has done much of the initial design work. She needs us to complete the project by writing media queries for the different display options. And in the figure here, we can see a preview of the mobile design, the smartphone on the left there, and the desktop design. So we'll be setting up the media queries to make the changes for the two different view types. We'll also be using several flex boxes to create the layout for these two designs so that the page content automatically rescales as the screen width changes. So in step number 1 now, we're going to go ahead and open up these pages in our HTML editor, tf_tips_txt.html, tf_styles4_txt.css, and tf_print2_txt.css. So here we are in Visual Studio. We're going to go ahead and open up the tips.txt file, the styles4.txt, and the print2.txt. As always, we'll go ahead and put in our name and date. I'll just copy this information and paste it in the other two pages. And then I'll go ahead and save this as, get rid of the _txt. We'll move over to Styles 4. Just go ahead and put in the author and date info. Do a save as on this page. Get rid of that _txt. And then finally our HTML file. Add the author and date info and do a save as. Getting rid of the _txt. Okay, so let's go ahead into source view here. Back to the instructions now. Instruction number 2. In our HTML file, we're going to add a viewport meta tag to the document head to set the width of the layout viewport equal to the width of the device and set the initial scale of the viewport to a value of 1. So as you might recall from the tutorial, the viewport tag is really important for us to make sure that our media queries will work correctly. And so we want to put in the content with a width property equal to the special value device-width. So that will make the viewport of the web browser the same width as whatever the device is that we're viewing the page in. And then we're also setting the initial scale equal to 1. So just a 1-to-1 ratio between the viewport and the device screen. In step 3 now, we want to create links for all of the style sheets. So we're going to put in there a link for the tf_base.css file. That's one that's already been written for us to be used with all devices. And then the tf_styles4.css that we'll be modifying. And that's used for all of the screen devices. And then the tf_print2.css file, which is used for print output. Okay, so there's the link for each of the 3 style sheets, tf_base.css, relationship style sheet. Now we're putting in the media attribute here as well. So that first style sheet, the media is going to be equal to all. In the second link, we've got our tf_styles4, which is for screen devices. So the relationship is style sheet and the media appropriately is set to screen. And then our last style sheet link there is for tf_print2. Again, the relationship style sheet, and this one the media is set to print. Next, in step 4 now, we'll just take some time to study the contents and the structure of the HTML document, paying special attention to the ID and class names of our elements and then save the changes that we've made to this point. So you can see that inside of the body we've got a header here, which is going to be the navigational system. And then we've got a section left and a section right that contains content. So section left, what we've got is this archive, so a list then of all the previous documents that they've posted. And we'll be manipulating that a little bit later on in the assignment. So that's in the section left. It has been classed, the nav section of it is, because you click on the links in here, that's been classed as vertical. Then we have another section which is ID'd as section right, and then inside of it is a section which has been classed as tips. And that has an article element that then has two, or actually the section tips has two articles in it. So you can see that each article has a header and then some paragraph text. And then also along with each of those articles is an aside, which will initially set to the right in the desktop view, the landscape view, but then for the smart view we'll want the aside to tuck underneath of the article element. And that's pretty much all there is to it. So let's go ahead and save our work here, Control S. And now back to the instructions. In step 5, we are instructed to go into the tf_styles4.css file. And note that Marjorie has placed all of her styles in the tfdesign.css file and imported them into this styles sheet. So we'll not need to edit the tf_designs style sheet. But we can go ahead and take a look at it, become familiar with the rules that she's set up. So first of all, here we are in the tf_styles4.css file. This is the one that we'll be working in for the smartphone or mobile devices and tablet and desktop devices. So we're going to set up two different media queries in here. Here is the import statement that identifies that we want to have the CSS file that Marjorie already created for us, the tf_designs. Now I'll go ahead and open that one up so we can take a look at it. And you can see that she set up the HTML element. It's going to have a background image, set the height to 100%, set the font family, font size there. In the body there's a box shadow that gives a positive shadow, so horizontal 5 pixels, vertical 0 pixels with a 15 pixel blur, but then also a negative 5 pixels in the horizontal, so left and right essentially. Nothing on the vertical, and then a 15 pixel blur there. Margins are set up to 0 and auto, so that's basically to help us center everything. Minimum width's been set to 320 pixels, max width to 1024, and then the width of the body is 100%, which is pretty common when you're doing responsive design, so that way as the screen width changes, the body will adjust dynamically. And then paragraphs have a line height of 1.4 ems, margin of 10 pixels, the header and footer, just a width of 100%, so those are inside of the body, which means that the header and footer then will also dynamically adjust their width when we change different device sizes. And then the header, which is inside of the body, has got a background color assigned to it. The image that's in the header has been set to display as a block. Its width also set to 100%, so again it's going to dynamically change. And then the H1 element in there has a background color, a foreground color, font size of 2 ems, line height of 2 ems, text is aligned to the center. Then in the header navigational list, we have these styles set up. So the nav horizontal has a background color, it's clearing to the right, and has a height set to auto. Then the UL inside of there is just set the padding values to 20. And then the list items inside of that navigational structure are set to a font size of 1.2 ems, height of 30. Text transform is uppercase, and the width there is 140 px. And then there's anchors inside of those list items, and the color there has just been set to that RGB value. Then we get into the sections. So the left section styles, you can see section left has a background color and a padding value. The H1 in section left has a font size, margin set to 0, top and right. Bottom is 15, left is 0. Text align center, and that's those archive items. Then you remember are just a list of list item is a bunch of list items, and so they're in that section left as well. Then they've got a background color, line height, margin, text align center, and a font size of 0.9 ems. And the anchors inside have the color of RGB 51, 51, 51. In the right section styles, then, that's where the articles are with the asides. Got a background color there for section right, and then the section tips have a different background color. And then a border's configured there, as well as a margin of 20 pixels. Tips, first of type, margin is going to be 20 pixels. Then the articles themselves, you can see we've got some declarations here for the header, which is the background color, the foreground color, and the padding. The article header 1, font size is set. The paragraph font size is a little smaller. Then the ordered list, we've got a list style type for disk, padding left of 30 pixels. And then the articles ordered list has a margin bottom of 20 pixels. And then in the asides, a different background color, 1.4 on the H1 in the asides, margin set up there. And then the image in the asides are all going to float to the right. The width is going to be 40%, so they'll dynamically change too as we scale to different screen sizes. Max width is set to 140 pixels there. And then initially, we've got this anchor that's been ID'd as nav icon. That's our hamburger menu. So that's the 3 horizontal lines, which is an image that we will show you here in the document that is the mobile device menu. So that's called the hamburger menu. You're probably used to seeing that if you use your smartphone on web pages very often. And then finally, we have the footer, its background color, font size there, text align is center, and the padding values. So let's take a look back into the tips here. And this is the nav icon that we're talking about. It's tf_navicon2.png. So if we go over here to our files and we find that, can't really see it here because the background of the PNG would appear to be white. It really isn't. But there's 3 horizontal white lines in that image. And that's the hamburger menu. We'll see that, once we get that configured for our style sheet to turn that back on in the smartphone or mobile view, as they call it. So now in step 6, we're going to go into the general flex styles section of that tf_styles4 CSS file. And within that section, we're going to create a flexible display layout that varies in response to changing screen widths. Note that when we use the different flex styles, we should include the latest WebKit browser extension, so the vendor-specific extension of WebKit. And really, our first step in that style sheet is step 7 here, where we're in that general flex style section. We're going to create a style rule for the page body that displays the body as a flex box oriented as a row and wrapping content to a new line as needed. So here we go into tf_styles4, down underneath of the general flex styles section. And there we want to add a rule for body. We want to set the display to flex, and so we've got the vendor specific WebKit -flex there first, and then we've got display flex. And then also the flex flow is to be set to row, and that's the direction, and then wrap, which allows, if we extend beyond the width that the flex items, we'll be able to wrap below. And then again, including the WebKit vendor-specific extension for that as well. So WebKit-flex-flow, row wrap. Save our work, Control-S. In step 8 now, it says the page is divided into 2 section elements with IDs of left and right. So we saw that when we looked at the HTML page. The left section doesn't need as much of the screen width, We'll create a style rule for the left section then that sets the growth and the shrink rates to 1 and 8 respectively. So the growth is going to be 1, the shrink is going to be 8. And we'll set its basis to 130 pixels. So that's just essentially going to be flex 1, 8, and then 130 px. So we want to target then the section that's ID'd as left, so the selector is section #left. Using the WebKit flex, this is the flex property that we're using here, and we're setting the grow value to 1, the shrink value to 8, and then the basis to 130 px. So the same values for both. You'll see that all the rules that we put in here will be using the vendor specific, so I'm not going to cover that each time we go through here. In step 9, the right section requires more screen width, so we'll create a style rule for the right section that sets its growth and shrink values to 8 and 1, so just the opposite of what we did for the other one. So 8's going to be the grow value, 1's going to be the shrink value, and we'll set its basis to 351. So that's for section right. That's our selector, and then the flex value, as we said, is going to be 8, 1, and then the basis 351 px. Save that. In step 10, it says next we'll create a flex box for the section element with the class ID of tips that contains an article and biographical aside, which will be displayed either in 2 columns or a single column depending on the screen width. Then we'll add a style rule that displays the class of the tips section elements as flex boxes in the row direction with wrapping. So here's our selector, section.tips. We're setting the display property to flex, and then the flex flow to row and wrap. In step 11, the articles within each tips section needs to occupy more of the screen width. So we'll create a style rule for article elements that lays them out as flex items with a growth value of 2 and a shrink value of 1. And the basis for that size is going to be 351 pixels. So here's our article selector, and we're setting the flex there to growth of 2, shrink of 1, and a basis of 351 pixels. In step number 12 now, the biographical asides within each tips section needs to occupy less screen space. We'll create a style rule for the aside elements that lays them out as flex items. They'll have a growth value of 1, a shrink value of 2, and their basis will be 250 pixels. So there's the aside with the flex designation or the flex property, setting the growth to 1, the shrink to 2, and 250 pixels. So just realize that we basically have reversed what we did with the article here. So the article was a growth of 2 and a shrink of 1, whereas the aside is a growth of 1 and a shrink of 2. So that means that the article won't need as much space, or I'm sorry, the aside won't need as much space as will the article in that tips section. Let's save that. In step 13, the horizontal navigation list at the top of the page will be treated as a flex box. So we'll create a rule there for the UL element within the horizontal navigation list, displaying it as a flex box in column orientation with wrapping. We don't have to define the sizes of the flex items because the width and the height are set in the TF Designs style sheet. So nav.horizontal space UL is the selector there. Display, setting it to be a flex box, and the flex flow is going to be column and wrap. In step 14 now, we'll go to the mobile devices section, and we'll set up a media query for our screen devices with a maximum width of 480 pixels. So this is the section that they're talking about right here. And when we create a media query, we want to use the @media rule. And you don't really need to have the only in here. That was for the old Internet Explorer web browser. So @media screen, so that's the device type. And then when the screen's maximum width is 480 pixels or less, that's when these rules that we create here will kick in. We're up to step 15 now. So for mobile devices, the vertical list of links to archived parenting tips should be displayed in several columns at the bottom of the page. The media query that we created in the last step, we want to add to it now A, B, and C here. So in A, 15A, we want to display the UL element with the vertical navigation list as a flex box in column orientation with wrapping. Set the height of the element to 240 pixels. In 15B, we want to give the section element with the ID of left a flex order value of 99 to place it near the bottom of the page. And then 15C, we want to give the body footer an order value of 100 to make sure that it is at the bottom of the page. So 15A then was to target the vertical navigational structure, the UL element, configure it as a flex item, set the flex flow column and wrap, and set its height to 240. Then we're targeting the section that contains all of those ULs. So that's section hashtag left, and just setting its order to 99 to make sure that when we get to the mobile view that it's the next to last thing on the screen, because the last thing is going to be the footer. And so to make sure that the footer is the last item on the page in the mobile view, we want to use the body footer selector and then set its order to 100. So that way we make sure it comes after section left, and then section right obviously will come before all of those, both of those items. In step 16 now, Marjorie wants to hide the navigation list at the top of the page when viewed on a mobile device unless the user hovers or taps a nav icon, that's the hamburger menu icon we were talking about earlier. Using the technique shown in the tutorial, we'll add the following style rules to set the behavior of that nav icon within the media query for mobile devices. So 16A, display the nav icon. Again, remember that's the hamburger menu, by creating a style rule for the anchor hashtag nav icon selector to display it as a block. So right now, remember, the display is turned off on that. Display is set to none. And then at the same time that we are setting up so that we can hover over the, or so that we can see, I should say, the hamburger menu, we don't want to see the original menu in the navigation list until the hover actually occurs. So in step 16B then, we want to hide the contents of the navigation list by adding a style rule that sets the display of the UL element with the horizontal navigation list to none. And then in step 16C, we'll display the navigation list contents in response to a hover or a touch by creating a style rule for the anchor hashtag nav icon :hover, so the pseudo selector hover, but then also in this case we're using the adjacent sibling selector of UL. So what that says is basically within the HTML document where there's a UL that has a sibling, meaning at the same hierarchical structure within the HTML document, that has a sibling just prior to it. So in this case here, the anchor that is the hash has been identified as nav icon when it's in the hover state. So the UL, remember, is the actual list items for the menu, and then the hamburger menu is that anchor hash nav icon. So essentially we're saying when the user touches or hovers over that icon, then we want to go ahead and display the actual list of items. So you can see there's actually two selectors there. The second one after the comma is nav.horizontal, which is that list group of list items. And we want to have that triggered in addition with the UL hover, because we want to make sure as long as the mouse is over that menu that's going to display, we want to keep it open. So we'll set the display value to block. That's, remember again, its display is currently set to none. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a comment here to identify that this is the nav icon menu styles. And then the first thing we want to do is target that anchor that's been ID'd as nav icon. We want to display it as a block. So that'll actually display the hamburger menu. The second thing that we wanted to do there is to hide the original menu. We don't want to see that in mobile view until the hover occurs. And then that's the third thing we want to do here, is to set it up so that when they hover over that hamburger menu, it will open up the list of UL items. Okay, let's save that. In step 17 now, we're going to go to the tablets and desktop devices section. So that'll essentially be for larger screens and mainly in landscape view. And we'll create a media query for those screen devices with a width of at least 481 pixels. So remember, we had maximum 480 on our mobile. Under the wider screens, the contents of the horizontal navigation list at the top of the page should be displayed in several columns. And in order to have the list items wrapped to a new column, we'll add a style rule to the media query that sets the height of the UL element within that horizontal navigation list to 160 pixels. Now, when I look at this, I realize I hadn't closed that media query here, so let's put in a closing curly brace. That's the important thing of a media query, is that all of your rules need to be inside of a set of curly braces, because that's the definition then of that media query that we have right here. So it begins here with the open curly brace, and then after we set up all our rules, we want to make sure that we've got a closing curly brace. So when I collapse this, we shouldn't see the curly braces at all. Okay, so we're going down into this section now, which is the tablet and desktop devices section. We'll create the media query for that. And again, we don't need that only keyword in there. It's outdated. So at media screen, and then this time minimum width 481 pixels. And so that I don't forget this time, let's make sure that I just add the closing curly right there. And then the rule that they asked us to create was the navigational set structure that's set up as classed horizontal, the same one that we were targeting up in here for the mobile media query. And they just want us to change the height there to 160 pixels. So we'll save that, and I believe when we go back to the instructions now, we're going to go ahead and save the changes to the style sheet, which I just did, and then open up our tips HTML file and go ahead and check it out in the device emulator. So here we are in Visual Studio. I'm going to go down here to my TF tips file, right click on it, view it in the web browser. You can see that this is the desktop size that we're viewing right here. So we've got the horizontal menu up top here. We've got those archived list of links over here on the left. And then we've got the articles that are the tips with the author information to the right here. So I'm going to press function key 12 now on my keyboard. So I go into the device emulator. And as we slowly reduce the size of the page, notice how those flex boxes are adjusting dynamically here. And there we got to the breakpoint of 820, I think it was right there. And that's what kicked the aside underneath of the article. And then we should reach our mobile at 480 here. Right there, we're kicking in at the 480. Yeah, actually not quite. There's a little in between here, as I remember it now. They don't have the intermediate media query set up here, and so that's why it looks a little bit weird when we get to right here, which is, you can see 491 pixels if you read my screen there at the top. But right there, now we're under 480. Once we hit the 479 there. Now we're in the mobile view. You see the hamburger menu kicks in, and only when I move my mouse over the hamburger menu does it actually show the list items from that horizontal UL. Now another way to do this too is we do have the phone emulator up here. I can just click on that. That kicks it in as well. But now I have to actually click to open it up and click outside of it to close it. So that's the way it should look at this point in time. Now we need to move on to the printing styles. So here you can see the graphic that shows you what the printing styles should look like. Basically removing the archive UL and the horizontal UL and just having the articles in the asides, and we want to make sure that each article displays fully on a single page. You don't want to have the beginning of the raising reader down here at the bottom. And so we'll show you how to handle that with the orphans setting and the orphans property in just a little bit here. So now we're moving into step 19, which is going to take us into the print2.css file. And in that file, we're going to go to the hidden objects section and then hide the display of these elements. So we're going to hide the navigation lists, the H1 heading in the body header, the left section element, and the body footer. Going under this hidden objects header here, we're going to go ahead and add several selectors here. So nav, body, header, H1, so body angle bracket, header angle bracket H1, comma, section hashtag left, comma, footer. So those are the elements we want to target in there. We just want to make it so they don't display in the print view. So we use the display property and we set the value to none. We'll save that change, Control S. Now we'll go to the page box style section of the style sheet and set the page size to 8.5 by 11 inches with a margin of 1/2 inch. So that's just the at page rule there as the selector. And then we have size property, 8.5, 8.5 IN for the width, 11 IN for the height, and then margin is set to 0.5 inches. Save that. In step 21, we want to go to the header style section, add a style rule that displays the logo image as a block with a width of 100%. So within the header styles there, we've got image hashtag logo as the selector, displaying it as a block, setting the width to 100%. Save the change. In step 22, we go to the typography style section and we add these rules. For the headers within the article element, we want to set the bottom margin to 0.2 inches. For the H1 headings within the article element, we want to set the font size to 24 points and a line height of 26 points. And then for the aside element, we want to set the background color to the RGB 211, 211, 211 and add a top margin of 0.3 inches. So the first rule there has article header as the selector, setting the margin dash bottom property to 0.2 inches. Then we target the article H1 element, set the font size to 24 points, the line height to 26 points. Next, we target the aside and set the background color to that gray value of RGB 211, 211, 211 and set the margin top to 0.3 inches. And then on the next page here for heading 1, for the H1 in the aside elements, we're going to set the font size to 18 points, line height of 20. For the images within the aside elements, we're setting the width to 0.8 inches. And for the paragraphs, we're setting the font size to 12 points with a top and bottom margin of 0.1 inch. So there is the aside, the H1 in the aside, font size set to 18 points, line height to 20. Then we add the rule for the image in the aside, setting its width to 0.8 inches. And then finally the paragraph font size is 12 points and the margin there is 1 inch top and bottom and 0 left and right. In step 23 we go to the hypertext style section and add the style rules to display all hypertext links in black with no underline. Also we'll insert a style rule that adds the text of the URL after the hypertext link in bold with the word wrap property set to break word. Sometimes URLs can be long and we want to allow it to be broken if need be. So first we set the anchors to black with a text decoration of none. And then after the anchors, we're setting the content to the H reference value. So we're actually taking the value from the H reference of the anchor and displaying that, setting the font weight to bold and setting the word wrap to break-word. And then step 24, we're going to go to the page break style section, add the following style rules. Insert page breaks after every aside element. Never allow a page break within an ordered list, an unordered list, or an image element. And set the size of the widows and orphans within paragraphs to 3 lines each. So that means that if we have a widow or we have an orphan, it must contain at least 3 lines. First, we've got the aside. We're just setting the page break after to always. It's basically what's going to move the second article to the next page when it overruns the page. It's longer than the page height is. And then we're setting our image, our ordered list, and unordered list to avoid any page breaks. And then finally, within our paragraphs, we're setting the orphans number of lines and the widow's number of lines to a minimum of 3 lines. So let's save that, Control S. Let's go back now and preview it in our HTML page here in the browser. And for this test now, what we're going to do is Control P so that we go to Print Preview. And there we can see that we have the logo, 100% width of the page. We have the article with the aside all on one page there, and then the next one on the second page. So the breaks are all appropriate. So that's everything that you need to complete for Review Assignment 5. Until next time, happy coding. If you liked this video, please click the like button and leave us a comment down below. I also would appreciate it if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, click the notification bell so that you'll be notified when new videos are posted.